Hello, my name is Abbas Jaffary, and my favorite thing is mathematics.
Welcome to the Finding Favorites podcast, where we explore your favorite things without using an algorithm. Here's your host, Leah Jones.
Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and this is the podcast where we get recommendations without using an algorithm and learn about people's favorite things. Pretty sure I said that backwards, but it's still all true. I'm really excited because my guest today is through the world of podcasting. We are fellow fans of How Did This Get Made? That was our initial connection, and we're going to get into all of it. We met at a live lit show. We have How Did This Get Made in common, and also the Chicago Knockouts, who you remember from being my very first paid ad on the podcast. Please welcome Abbas Jaffary. Abbas, how are you doing tonight?
I am terrific. Thank you for asking. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited that you followed up and that we're here tonight talking about a bunch of stuff. But I want to acknowledge we met through the How Did This Get Made Discord, and you came to a live lit show that my friend Jasmine runs where I read out my rules for being a fan of How Did This Get Made.
I loved it, and you summed it up perfectly, especially the one about hands off Jason.
Yes.
The fact that has to be explicitly stated to people just blows my mind. But yeah, just admire him, love him, don't touch him.
Don't touch him. It's so easy. It's so easy not to touch him.
Yeah.
When Paul Scheer was in town this summer with Dinosaur, his improv group, there were a bunch of us from the Discord standing in the lobby of the Den talking about how we were not going to ask Jason for a picture. Like, we were just all acknowledging it to each other. We're cool, we're good. And then somebody who was not on the Discord when Jason came out asked Jason for a photo, and I melted through the floor. And Paul came out, and Paul comes over right away to talk to his Discord people. And he goes to get a group picture, and then he starts calling over all the people in Dinosaur and calls Jason over and calls Carl Tart and Rob Hubel. And the looks on our faces when we realize we're going to be in a picture with Jason Mantzoukas is, I wish there had been a video of the whole thing, because we're all like, oh my God, he called over Jason. Behave. Hands in your pockets,
Oh, that's great. You got to celebrate when it happens organically like that. And it's just kind of and I think Jason, although he's not familiar with Discord, I'm assuming that he's like, all right, Paul knows what's up. This is cool. Yeah. Maybe I'll be uncomfortable, but it worked out well. I'm glad that he at least got a good experience out of it. Yeah.
And he was standing with the people that knew, hands off. We were all very respectful. So
that's terrific.
Yeah, it was a good experience. So one of the ways that we've stayed in touch is that you are involved with a roller derby league in Chicago called the Chicago Knockouts. I have been to one roller derby game. I saw it on TV occasionally growing up because I'm 47, so it was on wild, late night TV on occasion. But tell me about the Chicago Knockouts. How did you find them? Do you skate? Are you How, Abbas? How?
I do. So interestingly enough, I have a year on you, and I wish I had seen Derby as a kid, because back then you could find all the best stuff at late night television. Mm-hmm. There's a show I ask people about all the time called Rockin' America, which was on probably 2 a.m. And I don't know why I remember watching it, because I was really probably 7. Yeah. But I saw David Bowie and Quiet Riot in the same episode. And it was and the whole thing was this guy in a yellow suit and sunglasses. And the whole thing was about partying. And it was just so goofy. And then it was just gone one day. But I was like, what happened? So all who knows? Yeah. But yeah, I used to skate as a kid, and then kind of, for whatever reason, stopped. I don't know why. And then,
because rollerblading.
Rollerblading, and then I had a pair of rollerblades, and then briefly, and they got stolen, and then I was like, whatever. I just never got back to it. Yeah. And then, fast forward many years, and I finally needed to get some exercise, so I started walking, and then I rode my brother's bike around for a while, and I was like, what have I been doing? So I went and bought a bike, and and then my friend and I we were biking everywhere under the sun for many years, and then I moved south and to the south suburbs, and I could not keep my bike at the place because I lived on a 3rd floor apartment, no elevators, nowhere to store the thing. I'm not storing it in a public shed. So it was just sort of stored further away. So I wasn't exercising like that. And then I incidentally happened to speak to somebody about roller skating. And she had said, she at the time was, hitting 30 and had a bucket list, which included roller skating. And I'm like, you know what? I used to do that. I could probably even show you a few things. I mean, I can, I took, when I worked at a daycare, which is a whole nother story, I took the kids, we took them to the roller rink locally. And I was like, this is so much fun. So it was like, oh, I'm just going to get myself some skates finally, because that is something I can do instead of bicycling.
Right.
And when I put the thing on, it was like a beast awoke from his slumber. I was like, oh my God, why did I ever get out of these things?
Yeah.
And it just like, I mean, now there are a few days, sometimes a few days will go by where I don't skate. But yes, I have skated as far as I can, like everywhere, like I will skate all over the city. I've skated on tons of trails in the area, and I just started looking for people to skate with.
Yeah. And
then you slowly find people. And since I was in the south suburbs, there's not a lot going on until, I don't know if it was the magic of social media or what, and I had gone to a couple of derby bouts in the city, but then I discovered Chicago Knockouts, which was based in the south suburbs.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, okay, so they played at Markham Roller Rink, which was about maybe 15 minutes from where I lived at the time. So I went to, this was 2018. I started skating about a year before that.
Okay.
And I had met some folks locally called the Chicago Shred Union. They had a small indoor skate park up in like Bucktown, and they would do meetups. And it was like, oh, this is really fun. I'm meeting some other folks that do this. And then so I had one of their t-shirts, and I went to a knockouts bout once, and then I went to a second knockouts bout. And I inquired about food because I also happened to be going vegan around the time, and I was going to a ton of Chicago markets. And one of the folks I met said they had vended at a Chicago Outfits roller derby bout. So I was like, hey, there's this other derby bout that's happening, and I just want to have some, vegan options at this place. So I went to the ticketing booth, and I said, hey, would you guys consider doing this? The woman who was running it went and got my friend, the Crimson Vixen, who is the owner of the Knockouts, and she went and, who became my friend. At the time, I didn't know her, but she went and got her, and she says, hey, talk to her.
This is the origin story of meeting a friend, yeah.
I know there's a lot more detail than we need, perhaps, but...
No, it's fabulous.
So she said, talk to her, so I pitched the idea, and she's like, well, do you have a company? I said, I don't, but my friend does. She's like, well, who's your friend? I go, and I mentioned them, their name is Saint Martin, they're awesome local vegan caterers, and she's like, oh, I love Saint Martin, I'm vegan. I'm like, me too. And then I was like, whoa. So we ended up just, trading some information, and then ended up meeting up about a week later to discuss this idea of possibly having food at a skate event. And then instead of bringing it to Knockouts because she wasn't quite sure how that would work with that setup, we ended up setting up our own open roller skate event called the Plant-Based Skate. And it was just vegan food vendors and roller skating.
How fun.
We did a few of those, and then through that, we were hanging out, talking a bit more, and she started teaching me some, skating tips. And I said, I noticed the thing about the knockouts was as soon as the bout had finished, all the skaters and some folks were starting to clean up and help clean up everything. And I was like, oh, this is a completely DIY, everybody here is involved. And that's what I've been doing for at least 3 decades since a teenager, just putting on local shows, events, whatever, you name it, right? And everything everyone I know is involved in some sort of DIY productions. So I was like, oh, hey, let me just help put some chairs away. Let me help out. And I asked her, I go, hey, do you guys need any more volunteers and stuff? She's like, well, we're looking for referees. And I was like, done. I would love I can train. It's the best seat in the house. Yeah. And she's like, they're very hard to find. And then as we got talking more, she kind of explained to me how the world of roller derby has evolved and how it works. And our real ideologies were right on the same page because she is basically bringing back that old school style of roller derby.
1970s roller derby,
yes, which is just nonstop. Yeah, and it's nonstop. And we had conversations about the general culture of inclusivity, exclusivity, such and such. And while roller derby is a very popular sport, it's kind of has a sort of a steep entry point. I mean, you can't really play until you learn a lot of basic skills, and a lot of those basic skills take quite a while to master. And it's a pretty significant investment in terms of equipment and dues and so on and so forth. So you kind of really got to commit.
Right.
And if you do, you'll gain a lot from it. So her whole idea was, I want to lower the barrier to entry, and I want to make it more...
Sure.
So through the last several years that I've been with them now, we are entirely self-funded. She's got equipment there that is all free to use. There are no dues. So all you need to do is be a warm body that shows up. And she does, we have a lot of newcomers joining in the last few years, especially. And the main thing is the whole idea of, we were an all gender league. We respect pronouns. It's very inclusive. We don't, we want to make sure everybody respects everybody and so on and so forth. And then, yes, I've been involved as a referee, and I do a lot of the live production, and we're hopefully, fingers crossed, when the new equipment comes in, we'll be able to live stream by the end of this month.
Cool.
So, I'm very excited.
That's so cool. So what are some of the things that make Chicago knockouts in the 1970s style different from modern roller derby? What are the things that make it different?
I'm going to answer this as succinctly as I can. The main thing is the modern game is a lot slower than it used to be. And I don't remember the history of why that happened, but essentially it's a lot more strategic and there's a lot more interesting ways to, almost like playing chess, where you are blocking people off from moving. So there's a different element to it. And if you watch really high-end seasoned teams, it is very, very interesting and intricate, but you have to really understand the game.
Yeah.
Our version is the old style where nobody stops. We are not, you're penalized if you stop. We are constantly moving in motion. And not only is it a different style of play, we do believe, and I think the evidence speaks to this, is that it does reduce injury because changes in momentum when people get knocked is a smaller change in momentum. You're both going down together at almost the same speed, as opposed to just being like a bowling pin just getting knocked into by somebody.
Yeah.
And we also own a bank track. And the story of that is hopefully we can make a film of it one day, because the way it worked out was winning this track on auction on eBay, and then this sort of like crazy trip to Oklahoma to pick it up where our U-Haul trailer almost burned down on the way back, and all of this stuff, and then just kind of, just clamoring together like this like John Cusack 80s film where all these like, kids just like get together and get the truck loaded up. It's like 2 a.m. when we're all exhausted and whatever. But we have a bank track. We had it set up at a practice facility that we unfortunately lost. So we are looking for a place to set up our track. And it'll be the old 70s, 60s style bank track where the thing is massive. And we are practicing going fast, fast, fast. And ours is a little more theatrical. So everybody, in Derby, people have alternate aliases and so on and so forth. But ours, we're full on costumes and bout fits and personalities. So it's theatrical. It's very, very intense gameplay as well. I don't want to...
So it's theatrical in the style of like wrestling, but the sport is not planned who will win.
That's correct. We don't know who's going to win. There are certain things that are rehearsed for safety's sake, but there's a lot of improvisation as well. And yeah, exactly. The teams are generally very evenly matched. And we've got what's called a Premier League, and we've got the kids now, the Minors League, which I can't even speak accolade. It is the most... Those bouts are so loud. It's amazing. The parents are cheering on. And you see these kids anywhere as young as 5, 6 years old. And then we got the teenager league we have the teenagers and the younger ones.
Yeah.
And just watching them, it's like it is unreal just how happy and how they're glowing. And it's just incredible.
I can imagine that would have been a blast. So I took lessons at the roller barn growing up, right? Like our parents drove us out to Brazil, Indiana once a week for, I don't know if it was a year or 3 years. So we could be better roller skaters, to go to skating parties and go to the roller rink in our town. And if they had said, like, there was no competitive roller skating, and where I was from in Indiana didn't have figure skating. So it was just sort of this like it was a purely social skill that you could learn. And I love the idea that you've got kids and teens doing roller derby. What a fun, and it's co-ed, or it's all genders.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah, it really is. It's about this incredible community that's just been built from the ground up. I want to give a shout out to the Village of Homewood, who's been such a kind host for us for the facility that we rent and just helping us promote, and the local businesses there that have come in and starting to help sponsor. And, it's a really, really, really incredible community. And I just invite people all the time, like, come out. You are going to have a wonderful, wonderful time at this thing because it's just so happy and so fun.
So the Premier League, those are adults. Like,
yes.
Those are the adult teams.
Not all the skaters will play because we have a lot of people that are fairly new, and we do want to get them what we call, quote, bout ready. So it's not like some of the other leagues have like very specific drills that you have to, some tests you take, which is great because it's for your own safety. But ours, it's more like when the person feels ready, but we also rehearse. I mean scrimmage. We have a lot of practices to make sure, do you feel safe enough to do this at this level? And we are hopefully going to be introducing another league called the Rec League, which is more of a low-key entry point, like more for like, more fun based. It's less, it's competitive in a different way, but it's going to be much more like, hey, we're going to get our feet wet with this. and it's not as intense as the Premier League, but it's still like we just did one. It was like a medieval Dungeons and Dragons themed one. So everybody was dressed up in all kinds of gear, and we had foam swords and all kinds of stuff. So we have those various themed ones where it'll be more like just ridiculousness, but still you got to be able to hold your own. And then the premier ones are getting more and more and more competitive.
And then Chicago Knockouts is the league.
Yes.
And then they're managing all the teams underneath.
Yes, we've got 4. Most of the major leagues have 4 teams usually that sort of all play against each other throughout the year. And then occasionally when you can, some of the leagues will play inter-league, but we don't have, well, there's nobody else right now playing by our rule set in the local area.
Yeah.
We did have a sister league pop up in Flint, Michigan for a little while. It's just been and they're kind of where Knockouts was several years ago, where it's just been hard to sustainably get people because it's just, most people are playing different leagues and, there's just conflicts with practices. And I think they may have lost their practice space recently, and that's been an issue for a lot of leagues. So, but we're trying to get some of them out here. We're trying to go out there sometimes. And eventually, though, we are going to, I believe, next summer, each summer, there's a event called RollerCon in Las Vegas. Imagine that.
Fun.
Hopefully I can make it out next summer, but I believe Crimson Vixen and several Knockouts will be out there demoing our rule set on a bank track. And then for that, I will be going and refereeing.
How cool. And then is it like, I'm just going to say IO, for example, Improv Olympic, where the teachers decide who the Herald teams are? Is it Crimson? Is she the one figuring out the teams, or are teams pretty steady from one season to the next, or are the teams shuffled every game? How consistent is a team?
Oh, yeah, that's right. So we've got our set number of skaters, and they all, essentially, when you're ready to pick, you choose what's called your home team. And so, yeah, we've got several players that always play for certain teams, but players will rotate. Some folks will rotate if they haven't quite picked their home team yet.
Okay.
And we are waiting till we have enough trained people where all 4 teams can just have a steady lineup.
Sure.
Right now, people are alternating only because our numbers aren't big enough to sustain 4 totally independent teams, which I think need at least 15 people for like what we call a full roster. So we've probably got half of that, like permanent. Like some players will always play red and always play green, and some players will always play red and blue or something. But we're getting there. We're going to be eventually to the point where we'll have the 4 home teams that can then have their own set practices for themselves and so on and so forth.
Outstanding. Well, we'll link in the show notes to the Chicago Knockouts website and to any upcoming bouts. Are there bouts this fall? Is it a summer sport?
Yeah, we've got the September 28th coming up. And then we've got October, I think that's the 19th. I think that's the Saturday. And then there's a November. All the dates are on the website. So
Great.
September, October, November. And then there'll be, I think, a rec league bout maybe at the beginning of December.
Nice.
And then there's a minor league bout in, I think, November as well.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, Abbas, Chicago Knockouts and How Did This Get Made is what brought us together. But we are also here to talk about your favorite thing, which in one syllable is math, but I think it's much, much more. When you wrote me and said, can I come on the podcast and talk about how much I love math? I was thrilled. So let's get into it.
Thank you.
You've written a book, right?
Yes, it's a recreational book, and the idea came about very long ago and then sat dormant until I finally had some time to really put this thing together. And it's called Mathematics for Misfits, and it's just a collection of ridiculous math problems about not safe for work subjects, just to spice these things up.
Okay.
So, and the idea is just to make the thing sort of make people cackle and be like, oh, I didn't know that math could do this. And well, yes, it can. As an example, you're a vampire that drains blood from a victim, keeps the victim, the blood regenerates, you drain a little more, it regenerates. You keep that up until, to sustain this. That's just a mortgage. Like that's a mortgage payment. That's just exactly the same thing. So the same mathematics will govern those things. And that is in fact a problem set that I use to teach some of my kids in a second semester calculus course about sequences and series and, dressing up mortgage payments and loan payments. And then I said, well, how about this?
It's so funny. the CFA Institute, I work in finance. I'm a marketing person in finance.
Oh,
so
amazing.
I'm not a finance person. But my undergrad is in chemistry, so I am not a marketer who's afraid of numbers. I just didn't go in the direction of chemistry. So they have this like certification for people who are not financial advisors to learn the industry. And literally today, my class was on exactly that. So you were describing the vampire, and I was like, I just saw that table. I just saw that table on how like a mortgage, how the interest goes down over time, and eventually you pay zero interest. So that's really funny.
It's just, there's a whole lot of things like that you can do to just color these things and make them a little more fun. And the reason for this was I started off by a friend of mine who actually made a handful of very silly problems for his, at the time, his girlfriend that was studying for the GRE. And he made all these, I was like, this is hilarious. And then I started using some of those techniques to help my friends that were in school, and we would just make them really raunchy or gross, but they would cackle, but it would stick. And then I'm like, okay, I can do this. So I made the thing, and the whole idea is to open up, because I treat it as an art form. And so I really want this to be opened up to people who have been shunned or felt inadequate and they can't do it. I go, everybody, it is not some magic part of your brain where you're a math person. Like, that's a fallacy. That doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's just some people had the right instruction. Some people may have been interested and gone into it, but they had the right instruction and they had a community that fostered it as opposed to shunning them. And that's a whole nother, we can get into that too.
Yeah. So what is your math origin story? Were you a quote unquote math person growing up?
I always was, yes. Ever since I was little, I had dreams about numbers.
Yeah.
So I jumped ahead a little bit. And, I took calculus my junior year of high school. And at the time, I was one of those kids where I was just like, I got it. So I had terrible study habits. So if I studied, I got an A+. And then the next unit, I don't study and I get an F. And I'm like, I get it, whatever. I'm thinking I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, my senior year of high school, they canceled the 2 math classes that I was going to take because there were so few people taking them. So instead of this counselor saying, hey, why don't you go to the local community college and take some math classes, which is what I discovered later on as a thing, but at the time I didn't know.
Yeah.
They were like, you want to just take calculus again? And I'm like, no, I don't want to take it again.
No.
What are you talking about? So that was a lovely blessing in disguise because I took a photography class and a cartooning class, and that opened me up to the world of art. And full circle is what opened up like, oh, wait, this is so much more interesting. But that being said, I jumped back into it my freshman year of college. I kind of struggled a little bit, and I brought my grade from an F to a B in the second semester calculus course. And I was like, great, I can do all this. No idea what I'm doing with it. And then by my second semester as a freshman, I just wasn't hacking school. I was falling asleep. I couldn't hack it. I was like, okay, I don't understand what I'm doing with any of this stuff. I don't care. I don't ever want to open a math book again. This sucks. I'm done. And then I eventually left school. I was in and out of school. There was just life got in the way. And so I was like, whatever, I have no direction. And then many years later, I was doing volunteer radio at College of DuPage. And one of the overnight DJs showed me this book written by Michio Kaku about like extra dimensional physics and string theory and so on and so forth. And I was just like glued to it, like, oh, this is what the applications were. And what was, I just was so knee deep in music and art and stuff. I just didn't pay attention to school. So that kind of got some wheels rolling or the wheels spinning.
You started seeing the why.
Yes,
when
absolutely.
It's just calculus and when it's just problem sets and you don't know the why, it's really hard to get up and go to physical chemistry. Yeah. Because why? Why?
Yeah. It's like, and I don't know why I didn't see it sooner, but that's just, that's part of what got
why you didn't see string theory and quantum mechanics when you were 19?
Well, that's the thing. I went to, I later subsequently met, kids that were teenagers that were studying that stuff. And it's like, oh, okay, so I probably could have been doing that, but no one really suggested something like that. And me at the time, I'm like, I don't know.
I don't think in 1995, right? Remember, Google?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe existed, right? Like we had less access as teenagers to advanced theories outside of the classroom. So I'm going to say, give yourself a break that as a teenager in the 90s, you didn't have access to as much as a teenager does in the 2020s.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. And so as a result of that, and then I think I became a daycare teacher, as I mentioned. Just a friend got me that job, and I wanted to kind of go back into education to essentially teach mathematics in a engaging and fun way and address these gaps. So I went back to school at night. I was taking calculus and physics again, and I was like, oh, okay, these things are coming together. And of course, I would take some of my lessons and sort of sprinkle them into the daycare and teach them about like tangent lines and maximum and minimums and just everyday language. But, you know, the kids would be like, okay, I should have showed it to you, but I have a t-shirt over here that one of the students drew of me saying, here's a physics problem you must all learn. And then the kids are like, no, please. Okay, fine. It's just, I ironed it out into a t-shirt. It is my favorite t-shirt ever.
Oh, that's great.
It's,
I really liked physics when I took it, in part because I had a very adorable physics professor who went on to become a union organizer. So
awesome.
like he was great, but also because physics was the science that explained what we saw in the world. Like it explained how things moved through the world, how sound moved through the air. It's just that our tenured physics professor was not one who inspired a physics degree. So I went chemistry.
There's so much of that going on too. There really is.
Yeah. But I liked, when I looked back, I was like, yeah, physics explained what we see happening. And then you shrink it down or you like blow it out. And that's like the universe.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. It was that was the thing. It was such a perfect application of all of these things and you could experience it. And then if we just fast forward a little bit, there's the roller skating. I was like, oh, yeah, you're just doing from a first person perspective what you teach in a calculus class.
Yeah.
You know, for those who skate, a crossover, which is where you kind of move your one leg over the other to sort of simulate a curve, that's just a sequence of tangent lines. So I made a bunch of problem sets involving roller skating into my courses as well. And some of those, in featuring the knockouts, made it into the book as well. And I'm still doing some of the modeling and animation of some of our drills about like giving each other whips. Like you have hyperbolic or parabolic curves. I made a little 3D model, like a rendered model of our bank track for when I was teaching briefly at UIC. There was a little special project that I taught with some other students, brilliant students. And we rendered a 3D version of it that you can, you know, zoom around and look at. And I was like, okay, until this thing's back up, maybe I can make a game out of this. But there's that was all there. Now, so funny enough, when I went back to do my degree and I kind of got knee deep into it, I wanted to go in from an applied mathematics perspective. And at some point, I came over to what I call the dark side, which is pure mathematics, which is proof. And that was like, oh, this is so much more interesting. I don't care about the real world anymore. Yeah. All I care about is number theory and topology and whatever, you know, just I was like, oh, just weird shapes that you can study or weird properties of numbers or just logic or whatever. And there's always going to be applications for that because information theory and theoretical computer science ultimately became what I dove into because it merged so many things. But I was like, this is all some of that stuff. And I have brought it to elementary age kids. Some of that stuff you can, like group theory, the very beginnings, you can just teach that to kids and they enjoy it and it's fun because it teaches them how to model like rotations and movements in space. And it gives you a context for why you're learning division and remainders. And when you learn the basics of like the field axioms, for example, like why we have different number sets, natural numbers, integers, rationals, I was like, well, these are all because these are certain mathematical operations that you can and cannot do with these things if you want to stay in the same world. Here's an example. If you take, you know, any two whole numbers and you add them, subtract them, or multiply them, you get another whole number. Yeah. And if you divide them, you may or may not get a whole number. So the idea is, okay, well, then you introduce this bigger world of fractions, and then fractions allow you to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Great. So we give them different names, the rational numbers. You can do all these things, and it's what we call a self-contained system until you try to take what we call a square root. And you bring that into it, or other kinds of cubic roots. Now, the results are not necessarily numbers that you can write down as a fraction with two whole numbers. By that, I mean the number pi. The number pi cannot be expressed as a fraction where you just take some whole number, any whole number that you can possibly think of, divided by some other whole number. And if you divide any possible combination of them, it will never exactly equal the value of pi. So if you think of a number line where you dot all of these little places where every single ratio of two whole numbers, any two whole numbers that you can divide, think of the infinite amount of them, pi will never be on that line. There'll be a gap there. Wow. And it's like, okay, well, what is that then? And this troubled the ancient Greeks, and there's all these apocryphal stories about like them driving out people who are trying to preach this theory of irrational numbers that can't be expressed as fractions of whole numbers. But later on, you fast forward to the 19th century, I think George Cantor showed that, well, though numbers like pi that can't be expressed as fractions greatly, vastly outnumber the numbers that can be expressed as fractions, meaning there are different grades of infinity. There's a denser infinity than what we consider to be infinity. And people were like, what the hell is you talking about? He was driven out and died depressed and penniless. But he was right. So there are different grades of infinity, and the non-rational numbers vastly outnumber the rational numbers, to where if you just left all the irrational numbers like pi as gaps, the number line would look totally blank. It would look like you could barely see. So it's, it's like, what the hell? Like, this is all stuff you can teach kids whatever age they want to learn it. But I have done this with all levels to different degrees of detail. But there's a lot of really basic theory and ways to think about, we are categorizing these things, we're giving them names, and we're studying what you can and cannot do with these, and then why you need to then extend the definition or create this new entity that allows you to do this thing that you were trying to solve.
Right.
And you're like, it's just, I'm an engineer, but I'm a mathematician. It's like, it's not just a hodgepodge of bullshit that you are thrown at in traditional school.
Right. So you go back to school and you think you're going to do applied mathematics, and then you get into pure mathematics. And that's where you develop your personal understanding of these theories. And then you've been able now to take that into classrooms for kids of all ages.
Yes. Thank you for so well summarizing that.
I have so many questions.
Please.
Do you have a proof or a theory or a shape? What is your white whale problem that keeps you up?
Oh my goodness.
What's the proof that you either that still scratches an itch for you because either you don't understand it hasn't been proven yet, that you spend time on?
So I have been hunting for a metric that I can use to try to, and I can't even articulate this properly, so I'll do my best. But I'm trying to model human social networks, and not online social networks. I mean, just human civilization, or I should say the flow of information over human networks by means of a metric that somehow captures people's decision making. And so this is several different branches of math. By the way, I want to preface, when you get deeper into it, the branches of math don't become branches. It's just tools. You just are, It's like playing a song, right? You can borrow from 18 different genres, but at that point, it's just notes, music. You're building and creating and writing something, and you're going to use what it doesn't have to be defined by. So the same idea, I go, look, there's got to be so there is a beautiful theory of what's called the p-adic numbers. This was developed in the early 20th century, and again, it kind of sat dormant like a cute little way to study number theory. And then in the it had application, but in the 1990s, I discovered a lot of papers were discussed about trying to use this to model quantum cosmology and the origins of the universe and re-explain, that stuff. What it is it's a hierarchical kind of metric. So as an example, if you think of, what's a real world example? I mean, I've read papers about how DNA is essentially you can apply it to our genetic code and DNA, but I don't want to dive into it. But I will send you those papers because I think you'd have a blast reading them. Yeah. But what it does is it categorizes things it applies a distance to a characteristic of something. Okay. For example, if you take all the numbers and you divide them all by a prime number, say 7, the amount of times 7 divides into a number is considered a valuation on that number. So 7, 14, 21, 28, they all have a valuation of 1 since 7 divides into those numbers only one time. When you get into, say, 49 or 98 or multiples of 49, then they have a valuation of 2 because 7 can divide into 49 and 98 and such numbers twice. And 343, for example, has a valuation of 3 because 7 divides into it 3 times. You just take that number, divide it by 7, take that result, divide it by 7 if you can again, and you keep going. And you can do this for any prime. You do it with any prime numbers. And then what you end up getting is you get this valuation on these numbers, and then we do a little bit more mathematical. I'm going to call it sorcery, but if you read Fernando Gouveau's book or Neil Koblitz's book, they'll get into the weeds as to how this valuation turns into a metric called a p-adic metric. And it's essentially a fraction that places a distance on that number according to the lens of that prime number. What it means is if a number is highly divisible by a prime number, then it gets a very tiny distance, and two numbers that are very highly divisible by the same prime number are very close together under this metric. So it's just a way for you to sort of say, if you're a huge power of, say, 7, then you're going to be really close to this other huge power of 7. Instead of being really far away from each other, 7 times as far away from each other on the normal number line, under this new metric, you're close.
Okay.
And if you are not divisible by 7, then you have a valuation of, I think, infinity, where you have a valuation of 0, which becomes a distance of infinity. You're very far away because you're not divisible. So it's just it's a creative way to impose a sort of metric, a distance on the idea of how divisible something is.
Okay.
And when you take this and you try to make a picture out of it, you end up with these very beautiful fractal-like structures that are completely disconnected everywhere. But there's a way to sort of, you basically say these two things that are geographically very far separated on a number line are very, very close to each other under this metric, this mapping, which kind of like suggests, oh, okay, well, maybe if you're far away from somebody on two ends of the, you're two ends of the, say, country, but you can talk to each other like over a fast communication network,
right.
You can pass information very, very quickly, right, over these. And we have information flows that are doing that now. And okay, well, my whole thing is, how does that information flow find its way into local decision making? For example, if you're a super PAC and you're trying to you're a super PAC based in DC or somewhere, and you're trying to fuss with some local group in Texas or California or Oregon, and you're just funneling money into these things, right?
Right.
Well, your messaging is coming from very far away. It's not necessarily brewing locally, whereas in the past, most information sort of was diffused locally.
Right.
And I'm kind of thinking, well, what about all major imperial powers, right? If you want to have this, impose this presence, you're the ancient, Alexander the Great, or you're the ancient Rome or whatever, right? And you have this, how do you control a massive, you have to be able to send propaganda over distances.
Yeah.
And so that's, like I said, it's not entirely well formed, but I have this hypothesis that this non-local sort of long-term things that are separated geographically but can sort of send messages quickly is almost like a necessary component of imperialistic violence, is what I'm trying to prove. And it's a very ridiculous and sort of massive project, but I'm just trying to find a metric that I can stick to something. Like, what decision, how can I take this person's decision and apply some magnitude to this decision about this topic and turn it into something that can then be classified as what I was describing earlier as a non-Archimedean metric. It's this sort of, the geographic distance doesn't matter anymore,
right?
But it has local properties.
Yeah. And so it's a little bit blockchain.
Thank you.
Right? Like, the blockchain is a way of like IDing it's a way of IDing things. And so if you could blockchain all Roman propaganda,
yeah,
and have the blockchain go with it, whether it's verbal, a poster, on the radio, on the TV, on TikTok, and that's where things get harder to track, right? It's because you can't actually blockchain the knowledge.
Yeah.
Or you can't blockchain a rumor.
Yeah. Right. But it has influence somehow. And so my hypothesis is that necessary for you to have this sort of large-scale imperial control or not? Right. And I'm kind of thinking, because I see these, if you look at a lot of the parallels between what was happening during Trump's rise and what was happening during Nazi Germany, I was like, well, people like to exaggerate. Like, it's not an exaggeration. Like, you're seeing it in slow motion. If you visit the Holocaust Museum in Skokie and you look at all of the propaganda that's laid out, I'm like, oh, that's just social media. Like, that's exactly what that was. And I'm like, this is bananas. Like, it is, you are witnessing in real time how a state from X transforms to a state in Y over this ridiculous every day it doesn't seem like it's such a, but it is. It's a shift like this, like this, like this, like this, like this, in part due to this, like, it's not just your local, right? You've got outside interference just constantly bombarding you with this ecosystem of shit. So that's the kind of thing I was like, I just, I'm like, how do I, number one, articulate this? And how do I sort of get it on some ground footing? So that's the one thing. Parallel to this, I do independent research lately with a former professor of mine, Dr. Lewis Kaufman, who's one of the most brilliant people that I believe has ever existed, let alone alive today. His theories are phenomenal. He's a knot theorist topologist, and he's such a wonderful human being. And he's just written...
He's a knot theorist apologist?
Oh, sorry. Knot theory as in KNOT.
Okay.
He's pioneered a lot of work in that field over the last 4 decades.
Is that the opposite of string theory?
It's very closely related. Like, there's so many different areas to it. And he has been studying a lot of what we call quantum topology. He's been applying the pure mathematics to quantum topology, and in our case, quantum computing.
Okay.
But like a lot of, like in the 70s, Edward Witten had written a really seminal paper about quantum field theory, and he used the physics to develop these what we call a mathematical invariant. Just think of that as a calculation that produces a number or a formula about something, and it very accurately and always classifies something, and it's just something you created that says, I can attach some calculation to that property that I'm talking about.
Okay.
So instead of using the math to explain the physics, he ended up using the physics to explain the math.
Okay.
And Dr. Kaufman has been a real strong pioneer in that field of knot theory for decades now. Okay. So he's been studying a particular model of quantum computing called topological quantum computing, which has to do with condensed matter. You would find this very interesting with your chemistry background. A lot of condensed matter physics, and you got these really weird states of matter that don't exist at a macroscopic level. Mm-hmm. And in topological quantum computing, you have these sort of topological mediums where you can send signals through them, and the actual shape of it doesn't matter. Just the way that the thing is connected is really the only important thing, which is what we call topology in mathematics.
Okay.
And it's sort of like self-insulates from the outside world, which is the biggest problem in quantum computing, is the external world messing up your particle, your box of particles and stuff. So this, if you can manipulate the particles inside these condensed matter mediums, they're kind of automatically shielded. And the way things move around and evolve is very, very much like studying knots and knot theory. The world lines of these particles look like knots. So we've just been on this particular topic lately about quantum entanglement, and he had written a really nice paper explaining how certain factorizations of these tensor products can immediately spit out whether a quantum state is entangled or not. And then we discovered recently, there's kind of it's parallel to what I was describing earlier about things being separated at large distances but having instant communication. It's like the quantum level of that. And the way that a quantum state is entangled can be entangled in so many different ways. And so I think the stuff that he had pioneered initially can provide a really, really explicit map of this. And I'm trying to articulate that, and that's been very hard.
So when you are working on a problem like that, are you writing programs in a computer? Are you putting data into a program? Are you staring at the horizon, thinking about it? Like, is it a giant chalkboard a la Hidden Figures?
It's a lot of this.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a lot of writing things down at first. And then, yes, in some cases, I went and wrote some scripts to just carry out some calculations that were just better done on a computer. So for that quantum entanglement thing, I did write a simple Python. Maybe not simple, but it's not terribly sophisticated. It's more just, I wrote a little script in Python. I need to beef it up and tidy it up and I'm more of a academic hacker than I am a professional coder. So I got the thing working, and then I was like, how do I dress it up more pretty? Yeah. But ultimately, I did start learning. IBM has a really nice quantum computing platform called Qiskit that you can just start learning for free. So I was like reading my quantum computing books and then going and learning the IBM modules. And you can, one of the things that I really loved studying about this was teleportation. That is a thing. We have done it. Oh, hang on one second.
Why did it mute? Why did it freeze? It froze. You said, we have done it. And then it froze. Okay, wait.
Sorry, did I blip out?
You blipped out, but you were like, teleportation is real. And then you froze. And I was like, he teleported.
Oh my God, I wish. Yeah, we can we can do that. That's one of the things that allows quantum computing to work. So we can make it happen at a tiny, tiny, tiny level, but trying to do it at a macroscopic level is a whole different ballgame. But
Sure.
But yeah, you can go play with IBM's Qiskit, and then you can run some programs on their simulated quantum computer. And then once you get your results, you can actually use it on their real quantum computer and just run it, and it will run your program, and it'll have access to letting some particles do their thing, and then it'll spit out some probabilistic results to you, and it's really neat. The fact that we can, like you were saying earlier, like the fact that a teenager could go look at this now and do it is amazing.
Yeah. I remember in high school that we would, like, our chemistry teacher in high school got a certain amount of time on the supercomputer at, like, in Bloomington, Indiana. And we were doing just like modeling of basic chemicals. So mine was salt, sodium chloride, and we would like we would do a little bit of work on our classroom computers, and then he would send it off. Like, he had his time when he was allowed to like do the computations for us. And then in the morning or in a week, we'd come back and we would get like our information. Is it like that with IBM? Do you have to schedule time to be allowed to use their quantum computer?
If you're doing something big, I think so. But if you're just learning on your own, you can just start, because what you're going to be doing is so tiny. It'll probably put it into a queue, and then if it doesn't give you your results right away, you're going to get your results emailed to you in like 20 minutes.
Right.
But if you want to do something bigger scale, like if you're doing some AI project or blockchain or whatever, then yes, you probably have to just purchase time on the computer. And there's many, many other companies that have this stuff going now. And in fact, you may have seen the announcement south side of Chicago, right? Psi Quantum is going to be coming in and developing a huge plant in that whole Calumet corridor area, which is this hilarious, like Terminator 3, Mad Max sort of like wasteland. That's awesome. And just like, what is this? It's in the middle of the city. What the hell? There's some fascinating stuff going on over there that I'm like, you know what? There's probably a portal to hell down here. Like, it's great.
You probably can do teleportation from Calumet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would think so. I mean, it's I love it. I'm not knocking it. I love it over there, but I was like, what? It's so bizarre when you're downtown or on the north side or even like tighter spaces, and then you suddenly just go a little bit further out and you're like, what the hell? Like, there's nothing here except there's a really awesome skate park or a pump track that you can bike and skate on, and then people do drag racing nearby.
Yeah.
And then just just roads that go, where are these? It's bizarre.
Yeah, I can think of a specific like turn if I do like 41 all the way to my hometown, where they've like plussed it up a little bit now, but it used to be this you turn south and there was just like a big like danger sign if you went straight. Like you couldn't go straight, you had to go south, big chain link fence, and I was like, I don't want to know.
Yeah,
I don't want to know.
Like, okay, I've seen this. Many people have made films warning me about this, and I know how this is going to turn out. So you know what? Just I'll go around. It's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it that this exists. This is okay. This is right outside the city. Wow.
So you really like math.
I mean, again, it's the most abstract of all art forms, right? And it's just a language that you can use to do so many things with. And there's so much, what I preface in my book is, if you wanted to be a chef and you're like, I got into culinary school, I'm going. And all right, you get there and you learn how to make microwave meals. Hey, look, great. If you like microwave meals, wonderful, right? But that's what you're learning from K through 12 at most places. Some places are getting beyond it, but that is what it is. It is not the real thing. There's so much of the beauty and the sophistication and the agency and the way it's all left out. It's all algorithmic and very boring. And of course it's going to bore the shit out of people because it's stupid. I mean, I can't tell you how many students I have like that I tutor or that I've taught before. I'm like, people who made this textbook have no shame. Like, this is ridiculous. Yeah. Because at this point, I know enough people that are working in these fields, and I know the kind of things people work on. And I go, all right, this particular yes, I can see this would be used in such and such a way, right? But overall, this stuff is just what are you asking people to do? You're asking people to give you their time in learning these things. And so much of their time is just spent, running on the hamster wheel, just doing nothing, like just doing a bunch of computations that amount to nothing. I mean, I'm fortunate in the sense that it is boring because then I'm able to at least have a career out of making it not boring.
Yeah.
But I do feel that, once it stops being so boring, that our planet will improve 1,000-fold because you'll have a much more diversity of voices in this field, which has been lacking since the dawn of human civilization.
Right.
It is this gatekeepy bullshit, old boy, 18th century old boys club that, things are changing little by little by little, like very little. But man, like that, it's just something people have to contend with on top of it being sort of shitty instruction to begin with.
Right. I really thought we were going to talk about like new math, which my sister has told me about because her kids have gone through the experience of like new math. And she's a big fan because her kids were being taught a variety of ways to solve the problems. They were being taught problem solving in different avenues versus like in the 80s when we were taught like the way. And if the way didn't click for you, you were like at the dining room table crying with our dad because math was so stressful when we were in junior high.
Yeah.
And so my sister will always come out and defend new math because she's like, if I had been introduced to these concepts with multiple approaches, she would have a wholly different attitude towards math.
Yeah, and the funny thing is people call it new math because it's new to them because it wasn't how they grew up. But I'm like, no, a lot of those methods have been around for thousands of years. And we just never bothered to, it's like you traveling to, say, Asia and like, oh, there's all this new food. It's like, well, yeah, it's been there. I mean, we maybe don't have access to all these spices, but it's been there. It's just now some of that fusion is making its way over here. And you're like, oh, I know now, and there is, at the end of the day, though, right, it's the problem sets. And it's saying, hey, okay, yes, there is merit to, now some of it goes a little bit too far because sometimes, they're like the teacher. And again, I'm not going to knock teachers except for some of the people who just don't give a shit. And in that case, and there's plenty of those people, and fuck you. I'm just going to say that outright because you should leave the field because you're making people's lives horrible and you don't need to be there.
Yeah.
But that's not the majority. Most of the teachers they're like the most selfless heroes. They are doing the work that needs to be done, helping raise people's children alongside of literally keeping our society from crumbling at every turn. And they are given materials with which they have to work. And a lot of times those materials are limiting and they have to teach to tests and stuff. So, and I can speak to this to some degree. Even I've stayed out of K through 12 because it's a clusterfuck. And even in higher ed, I was like, okay, I was getting kind of bored the way I was doing things. So yes, I'm not going to talk about, again, my problem in my book about visiting a swingers club and all the different ways you can, interact with different people and all that. I was like, how many threesomes, how many foursomes can you form out of? These are, okay, I'm not bringing those into class.
Right.
However, I'm going to dress up my problems.
Stick to vampires, stick to roller derby.
Yes, roller skating, vampires, exactly. I go, fine. And, it's like some people have fun, they cackle with it, but when you try to get a little creative, you're just pushed out. And it's like, okay, you know what, this is so it's again, and because I'm not necessarily teaching to tests, right? I'm trying to get these kids to just think from the ground. When I say kids, I mean 18-year-olds and above, right?
Yeah.
That's what I mean. I'm almost 50, so a lot of people are kids now to us.
Yep.
And so I was like, hey, I want you to just think about this from the ground up and let's do it in a fun, creative way. And that's just not welcome in most places.
Right.
And, you're working with these materials that are just marketed to people you're paying exorbitant prices for textbooks. And these textbooks are shit until you get to the more advanced stuff. And then it's way more interesting, but it's also indecipherable because you don't have the training.
Yeah.
So it's a whole cluster.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot more going on. I do very much appreciate people that are putting stuff on YouTube or out there and putting some lesson plans. And it's still like very hard to put it together on your own because you don't have that feedback.
Yeah.
Coding is the same thing. It's just like I've banged my head with coding all the time because I was always math, even though I grew up with computers and I know computers very well. But
yeah.
So I myself experienced those same barriers and those same brick walls. So I try to say, what can I do to make this interesting for myself? And then eventually it'll make it over into the next volume of Mathematics for Misfits or whoever I teach. But there's just, so you should just start thinking about a problem and thinking about the way you would solve it. Don't worry about all the vocabulary and all that. Yeah, just start attacking something, get your own ideas out there, and then go and look at what someone's doing more formally and then build. That's just how mathematicians are getting better at it. Like a lot of stuff that I learned, I had already thought about in some weird ass way. And then I was like, oh, okay, cool. And maybe I didn't think about it, but at least I had some foundation. And that's the thing. I just go at it, try something.
Yeah. Abbas, how many volumes of Mathematics for Misfits have you written?
So just the one. I mean, I had written like a simpler, like a photocopied zine version of it back in 2018. And then by 2020 or 2021, I had dressed it up into a nice actual printed book with a few extra little embellishments on it. I've got enough content for probably 2 or 3 more volumes, depending on how big they're going to get.
Yeah.
So the one thing, and I shoot myself in the foot, right? I have sort of neglected to promote it a lot because I've been trying to work. So parallel to all of this, especially over the last few years, I started jumping into the world of accessibility and realizing, a lot of the way I do things is just, there's a whole profession about this. Wow, I didn't know that. And specifically for math, when we went online over pandemic, I was like, well, wait a minute. How are people with any sort of like vision or hearing or any sort of impairments going to get math instruction online when it's hard enough? I mean, that opened up this rabbit hole that eventually got me to write the book and start diving in and learning more about web design again from an accessibility standpoint.
Right.
And I've been trying to get Math for Misfits into a fully accessible ebook format that people can read with screen readers and braille displays and whatnot. And that has been this, again, that I finally got the thing. I have the thing working in both Apple Books and Thorium Reader, one of which uses MathJax to render the math, and the other one uses MathML. And it should hopefully work both in light dark modes. And the reason that was so difficult is because the things that are controlling the different colors are different for text and math and graphics and tables.
Oof.
So,
okay.
And try to get them in both. I was like, what the hell? And I was like, oh, okay, a lot of this technology, again, is being done by volunteers, so it's not entirely mature. So I've created a whole entire website about this called Accessible Mathematics, which is just a survey of all these different things happening that I do need to update, but it's a good starting point.
Yeah.
So now that that's done, now the next level, I also made an entire website in WordPress out of it, which I also haven't put up because the ebook had to get done. And the last little challenge here is, where do we sell ebooks? And I found some sites. I have a friend that is also starting her own publishing company that I think I'm just going to be able to sell it through her site. Yeah. And again, another way I shoot myself in the foot is I don't sell the thing on Amazon. I'm only going to sell the thing through independent bookstores.
Yep.
If bookstores themselves want to put it on Amazon, great. But there's a lot of self-publishing tools for Amazon, Ingram, great. More power to you, anyone who wants to use them. I specifically do not want my stuff sold through big retailers. It should only be available. So I'm like, no publisher's going to want to work with me when I tell them, don't put my book on the biggest book selling platform in the world. But mine is like, no, you have to go to an independent bookstore or you got to go to somebody independent and buy it that way. And then let's go from there.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
What is the best way for people to find you online to know when the ebook is available? Oh,
thank you. So I do have a Mathematics for Misfits on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter.
Nice.
And I think I might have made a Twitch. I'm on GitHub and LinkedIn as I've got a little page for it or something. So I'm on various different social media. I will have a website for it up hopefully very, very, very soon.
Great.
Right now, Quimby's has the printed copy. Quimby's in Chicago.
Yep.
Possibly Third Coast I might have to drop some more off to him.
Okay.
I was going to try to hit Pilsen Community Books. I'm actually running out of copies pretty soon. So there's few people that are selling it for me, but mainly just follow on social media. I rarely post only because I don't want to just post fluff.
Yeah.
I want everything to be working so that then I can start, I do have a whole regiment of what I will produce, but I really needed to build this infrastructure. Now that it's built, I'll be able to crank out more content, more problem sets and whatnot with regularity. But man, that building that foundation has been a real motherfucker, if I may say.
I bet. It's hard enough to make a fairly plain website accessible, let alone one with math, complex word and physical problems. So we will link to those in the show notes so that people can follow you and get updates when the ebook is ready. And what about Chicago Knockouts? Where can we find them online?
Oh, ChicagoKnockouts.com will point you towards buying tickets or the various social media. They're very active. TikTok especially. You've got to see the promos that one of our skaters, Marley Quinn, makes are just absolutely brilliant. Like, she puts these really clever clips together. And the one recently it's one where we've got 3 of our, seasoned knockouts sitting at the table playing a board game, and then they cast a spell, and all of a sudden they turn into their younger selves, and it's their actual kids who are in Knockouts League, and they're just like, what happened? And it is one of the greatest things I've ever seen. It is so adorable. So Chicago Knockouts is really active on TikTok and Instagram, Facebook, socials, and we're, hopefully those things are getting out there. We're building a local following. We just ordered some new equipment, and with luck, we'll be able to stream our September 28th bout on Twitch and TikTok.
Nice.
So we will keep people posted on that.
Outstanding. Well, Abbas, this has been a blast. I didn't expect to have so much fun on a Monday night talking about math, but here we are.
Thank you. Thank you. That means the world. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. If you are listening to Finding Favorites for the first time, please subscribe on your podcast catcher of choice. Rate 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Give it a thumbs up on Good Pods, because recommendations and reviews is important for the big podcasts, so it's important for the little ones too. And with that, wear your mask, wash your hands, and keep enjoying your favorite things.
Thank you for listening to Finding Favorites with Leah Jones. Please make sure to subscribe and drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. Now, go out and enjoy your favorite things.